Padre Pio saw 3 demons standing at the foot of a young friar's bed, and the young friar did not even know they were there. He was sleeping, peacefully. Or so he thought. But Padre Pio, walking past the cell at 3 in the morning on his way to the chapel, stopped. He pressed his bandaged hand against the wooden door, and through the door, with those eyes that could see what no living person should be able to see, he saw them. 3 shadows, darker than the darkness of the room, standing around the bed like surgeons around an operating table, and they were whispering, not words you could hear with your ears, words that sank directly into the sleeping friar's mind, words of doubt, words of despair, words designed to crack the foundation of a young man's faith before he even woke up. Padre Pio did not knock, he did not shout, he did not make a scene. He simply pressed his lips to the crack between the door and the frame, and he whispered 5 words. 5 words that he had whispered every single morning of his life for decades. 5 words that had kept him alive through 50 years of demonic attacks so violent that the other friars could hear furniture being thrown against the walls of his cell at night. And these were not metaphors. Brother Modestino, who served as Padre Pio's assistant for years, would later testify under oath that he saw the marks on Padre Pio's body. Not just the stigmata, bruises, scratches, welts that appeared overnight as if something had beaten him while he slept. On one occasion in 1947, the friars found Padre Pio on the floor of his cell at dawn, his habit torn, his pillow across the room, deep scratches on his arms that were not there the night before. When they helped him to his feet, he said only, "They came again last night. More of them this time. They are angry because of the conversions. The more souls that come back to God through my confessional, the angrier they become. But they cannot win. They never win. Not as long as the Holy Family stands between them and me." On another occasion, Father Agostino recorded in his diary that the sounds from Padre Pio's cell were so terrible that 3 young friars fled the corridor in fear. They heard what sounded like a man being dragged across the floor, the crash of furniture, a sound like heavy chains being swung against wood. And then, always, at the darkest moment, when the noise reached its peak and it seemed as if whatever was inside that cell was going to tear it apart, there would come a whisper. Padre Pio's voice, barely audible through the door, 5 words, and then silence, total, absolute silence, as if the room itself had been emptied of everything that was not peace. 5 words that the demons feared more than holy water, more than blessed salt, more than the sign of the cross. And the moment those 5 words left his lips and entered the room, the 3 shadows recoiled. They did not leave slowly. They fled, like cockroaches when you turn on the light, gone in an instant. The young friar slept on, unaware that a battle had just been fought and won on his behalf. And in the morning, when he woke, he felt something he had not felt in weeks: peace. Real peace, the kind of peace that settles into your bones like warmth from a fire, and he did not know why. But Padre Pio knew. And tonight I am going to tell you what those 5 words were and why they hold a power that most Catholics have forgotten. Before I tell you the words, I need to tell you the story. Because the words without the story are just sounds, and sounds without understanding are just noise. The power of these words does not come from the words themselves. It comes from what they mean, from the spiritual reality they invoke, from the door they open and the door they close. And to understand that, you need to understand what was happening in San Giovanni Rotondo in the winter of 1957, when a young Capuchin friar named Brother Giacomo arrived at the monastery with a suitcase full of books and a heart full of doubt. The monastery of Our Lady of Grace sat on a ridge above the small town, like a stone ship anchored against the sky. In 1957, San Giovanni Rotondo was not the great pilgrimage center it would later become. There was no grand church, no hospital, no hotels lining the road. It was a small, wind-beaten Apulian town surrounded by olive groves and rocky pastures, and the monastery above it looked as ancient and immovable as the mountain itself. When Brother Giacomo stepped off the bus on that January afternoon, carrying his suitcase in one hand and a volume of St. Thomas Aquinas in the other, the first thing he noticed was the cold. Not just the physical cold, although the Gargano wind cut through his habit like a blade, a different cold. A heaviness in the air around the monastery that he could not name or explain. The second thing he noticed were the pilgrims. Even in winter, even with the wind howling and the roads half frozen, there were people, dozens of them, standing outside the monastery gates, waiting. Some had traveled from Naples, some from Rome, some from as far as Sicily. They were waiting to see Padre Pio, to attend his Mass, to confess to him, to ask him to pray for their sick mothers, their troubled marriages, their lost children. Brother Giacomo looked at these pilgrims and felt a pang of something between pity and contempt. They believed this old friar could see into their souls, that he could read their sins before they spoke them, that he bore the wounds of Christ in his own flesh. Giacomo believed none of it. He was here to study, to serve the order, to fulfill his mother's dream, not to chase miracles. Brother Giacomo was 24 years old. He had entered the Capuchin order 3 years earlier, not because he had a burning vocation, but because his mother had begged him. She was a devout woman from a village near Assisi, and she had always dreamed that one of her sons would become a priest. Giacomo was the fourth of 6 children, the quiet one, the bookish one, the one who always had his nose in a volume of theology or church history while his brothers played football in the piazza. He had agreed to enter the order partly to please his mother, and partly because he genuinely loved the intellectual life of the church, the theology, the philosophy, the debates about grace and free will, and the nature of God. What he did not love, what he had never experienced and frankly did not believe in, was the supernatural. He believed in God, certainly. He believed in the sacraments. He believed in the church. But demons, angels, mystical visions, stigmata, he considered these things to be, at best, metaphors, poetic language for psychological states, the struggle against temptation described in dramatic terms. He did not believe that actual beings of darkness prowled the corridors of monasteries at night. He thought that was medieval nonsense. He had written a paper during his novitiate arguing that the accounts of demonic possession in the Gospels were metaphors for mental illness, and his superiors had praised it for its clarity and intellectual rigor. He was proud of that paper. He brought a copy of it with him to San Giovanni Rotondo, tucked inside the volume of Aquinas. He would later burn that paper in the monastery fireplace. But we will get to that. He thought everything he believed was right, and everything the pilgrims outside believed was superstition, right up until his third night in San Giovanni Rotondo. On his third night, Brother Giacomo woke at 2 a.m. to a sound he could not explain. A scratching, not on the wall, not on the floor, on the inside of his mind, as if something with claws was trying to scratch its way into his thoughts. He lay in bed, paralyzed, not by fear, by confusion. He was a rational man. He did not believe in these things, and yet the scratching was there, real, undeniable. And with it came a voice, not a voice he heard with his ears, a voice that seemed to rise from somewhere deep inside his own skull, a voice that said, "You do not belong here. You have no vocation. Your mother forced you. You are a fraud, a pretender. God does not want you. The priesthood does not want you. Go home." Brother Giacomo pulled the blanket over his head like a child hiding from a thunderstorm, and he lay there trembling until the first light of dawn crept through the tiny window of his cell and the scratching stopped. In the morning, he told himself it was a dream. Stress, nerves, the adjustment to a new place, nothing supernatural, Just his anxious mind playing tricks on him. But the next night it happened again. The same scratching, the same voice, the same words. "You do not belong here. Go home." And the night after that. And the night after that. Every single night for 3 weeks, Brother Giacomo woke at 2 in the morning to the scratching and the voice. And every morning, he told himself it was nothing. But it was getting harder to believe that, because he was changing. He could feel it. The doubt that had always been a quiet companion, a gentle intellectual skepticism, was becoming something else, something darker, something that did not just question God's plan, but actively hated it. He found himself unable to pray. The words of the Psalms, which he had always loved for their poetry, now felt like ash in his mouth. The Mass, which he had always appreciated for its intellectual beauty, now seemed like an empty ritual performed by men who were deluding themselves. He was losing his faith. Not gradually, rapidly, like a boat taking on water, and no amount of theological reasoning could plug the holes. Let me tell you something from my own experience. When my son went through his crisis of faith at 17, I watched the same thing happen. Not the scratching, thank God, but the same rapid erosion. 1 week he was serving at the altar. The next week he refused to go to Mass. The week after that, he told me that religion was a fairy tale for weak people. And I remember thinking, this is not a natural progression. This is not a teenager growing up. This is something else. Something is pulling him away, not from outside, from inside, from a place deeper than his thoughts. And it was not until years later, when he came back to the church after visiting San Giovanni Rotondo, of all places, that he told me what it had felt like. He said, "Mum, it was like someone turned off the light inside me, like someone reached into my chest and flipped a switch, and everything that had been warm and bright and true suddenly went cold and dark and meaningless, and I could not turn it back on, no matter how hard I tried." That is what the enemy does. He does not argue with you. He does not debate theology. He reaches for the switch. By the 4th week, Brother Giacomo had decided to leave. He would pack his suitcase, take the morning train, and go home to his mother's village near Assisi. He would tell her he was sorry. He would find another path, teaching perhaps, or scholarship. Something respectable, something that did not require him to believe in things he could no longer feel. He had made his decision. It was final, and he was almost at peace with it. Almost. Because there was one thing that nagged at him, one detail that did not fit his rational explanation. If the scratching and the voice were merely the product of his anxious mind, why did they always stop at exactly the same time? Not at dawn, not when he turned on the light. They stopped at precisely 4:15 in the morning. Every single night, at 4:15 the scratching ceased, the voice went silent, and a different feeling entered the room. A feeling of calm, of warmth, of something that Brother Giacomo, despite his rationalism, could only describe as presence, as if someone had walked into the room at 4:15 and the darkness had simply retreated. He mentioned this to an older friar named Brother Leone during breakfast one morning. He said it casually, as if it were a curiosity, not a crisis. 4:15, he said, odd time. I wonder what happens at 4:15. Brother Leone looked at him over his coffee cup, and then he smiled, a knowing smile. The smile of a man who has lived in San Giovanni Rotondo for 30 years and has seen things that would make a theologian weep. He said, 4:15 is when Padre Pio gets out of bed. Brother Giacomo stared at him. Every morning? Every morning. For decades. At 4:15, Padre Pio rises. And the first thing he does, before he puts on his sandals, before he lights his candle, before he even opens his eyes fully, is whisper a phrase. The same phrase. Every morning. For as long as anyone can remember, Brother Giacomo felt something shift inside him, something that his rational mind could not account for. He asked, What phrase? Brother Leon shook his head. I have never been close enough to hear the exact words, but I will tell you this. Whatever he says, it changes the air. The entire monastery feels different after 4:15. Before that, especially in the dark hours, there is a heaviness, a tension. Sometimes we hear sounds in the corridors that should not be there, footsteps where no one walks, doors opening where no one enters. But at 4:15, when Padre Pio whispers those words, everything changes. The heaviness lifts, the tension dissolves, and for the rest of the day until nightfall, the monastery is at peace. It is as if his words draw a line that the darkness cannot cross. That night, Brother Giacomo did not sleep, not because of the scratching, because of a decision. Instead of fleeing, he decided to investigate. He decided to find out what Padre Pio whispered at 4:15. He set his mind to it with the same intellectual determination that had made him a brilliant student of theology. This was now a research project, a question to be answered. And Brother Giacomo was very good at answering questions. For the next week, he woke every morning at 4 and positioned himself in the corridor outside Padre Pio's cell. The corridor was dark at that hour. No electric lights. The monastery still used candles and oil lamps in the private quarters. And at 4 in the morning, the only light came from the thin moon through the high windows at the end of the passage. Brother Giacomo stood with his back against the cold stone wall, his bare feet numb on the tile floor, his breath making small clouds in the January air. He pressed his ear against the wall. He held his breath. And he listened. On the first morning, he heard nothing, just the wind outside and the settling of old stone. On the second morning, he arrived earlier at 3:45 and heard the distant sound of something moving inside Padre Pio's cell. A creak, a soft groan of pain. Padre Pio's stigmata wounds bled freshly every night, and the simple act of rising from bed was an agony that the old friar endured without complaint. Giacomo stood there, listening to an old man suffer, and felt a strange stirring of something he had not expected, not curiosity, compassion. On the third morning, he positioned himself directly beside the doorframe and heard the shuffle of feet on a wooden floor, the clink of rosary beads being lifted from a nightstand, a slow, labored breathing. But not words. The walls of the monastery were too thick. Centuries of stone and plaster absorbed the sound. He could hear movement, but not the phrase. On the fourth morning, he tried pressing a drinking glass against the wall, the way he had read that spies did in novels. It did not help. On the fifth morning, he brought a stethoscope borrowed from the monastery infirmary and placed it against the stone. He heard Padre Pio's heartbeat, slow and steady, and the rustle of fabric, but still not words. On the eighth morning, Brother Giacomo did something bold, something that could have gotten him sent away from the monastery. He crept to Padre Pio's door and pressed his ear directly against the wood, and this time, in the silence of 4:15 in the morning, with the world holding its breath around him, he heard it. Padre Pio's voice, barely a whisper, hoarse from sleep and from 50 years of pain, but clear enough to understand 5 words in Latin, 5 words that Brother Giacomo, with all his years of theological study, recognized immediately. Not because they were rare or obscure, because they were the opposite. They were so common, so familiar, so basic, that no serious theologian would give them a second thought. And that was the reversal. That was the thing that nobody expected. The phrase that kept demons at bay, the phrase that changed the air of an entire monastery, the phrase that had protected Padre Pio through 50 years of the most violent spiritual warfare in modern church history, was not some secret prayer from an ancient manuscript. It was not a formula known only to mystics and exorcists. It was not a hidden teaching passed down through generations of saints. It was 5 words that every Catholic learns as a child. 5 words so simple that most people stop saying them because they think they have outgrown them. The words were, Jesus, Maria, Joseph, adiuvate me, Jesus, Mary, Joseph, help me. That is it. 5 words, an invocation of the Holy Family. The most basic prayer in the Catholic tradition, a prayer that grandmothers teach their grandchildren, a prayer that most adults abandon because it seems too simple, too childish, too unsophisticated for a mature faith. And yet this was the prayer that Padre Pio, the greatest mystic of the 20th century, the man who bore the wounds of Christ in his own flesh, the man who battled demons every single night of his life, chose to whisper every morning before anything else. Not the Our Father, not the Hail Mary, not the Rosary, not the prayer to Saint Michael, not any of the great, complex, theologically rich prayers of the Church. 5 simple words: Jesus, Mary, Joseph, help me. Brother Giacomo stood in the corridor with his ear against the door and felt something collapse inside him. Not his faith, his pride, his intellectual pride. The pride that had made him think that faith needed to be complex to be powerful, that prayers needed to be sophisticated to reach heaven, that the supernatural needed to be analyzed and understood before it could be experienced. In that moment, standing in the cold corridor at 4:15 in the morning, with the echo of 5 simple words still vibrating in the stone walls around him, Brother Giacomo understood something that all his years of study had never taught him. He understood that the power of prayer does not come from the complexity of the words. It comes from the humility of the heart that speaks them. A child who says, Jesus, Mary, Joseph, help me with genuine trust, sends a prayer to heaven that is more powerful than a theologian's most brilliant treatise. Because God does not weigh words, God weighs hearts. And a humble heart is heavier than all the books in all the libraries of the Vatican. This is what Padre Pio knew. This is what he lived every single day. In a monastery full of learned men, surrounded by volumes of theology and philosophy and canon law, the most powerful weapon against the darkness was a 5-word prayer that any child could say. And the reason most Catholics do not experience its power is not that the prayer does not work. It is that they stopped saying it, they outgrew it, they moved on to more sophisticated devotions, and in doing so, they abandoned the very weapon that the greatest spiritual warrior of their century relied on every single day of his life. I need to tell you what happened next, because this is where the story becomes personal for every single person listening to this. Brother Giacomo went back to his cell. He did not pack his suitcase. He did not take the morning train. Instead, he knelt on the cold stone floor of his cell, and for the first time since his arrival at San Giovanni Rotondo, he prayed. Not a theological prayer, not a scholarly prayer, not a prayer designed to impress God with its eloquence. He said 5 words. Jesus, Mary, Joseph, help me. He said them once, and then he said them again, and again, and again, like breathing in and out. Jesus, Mary, Joseph, help me. And something happened. Something that Brother Giacomo would later describe in a letter to his mother. A letter that was discovered in the family archives decades later and published by a church historian in 2003. He wrote, "Dear Mother, I cannot explain what happened. I knelt in my cell and said the simplest prayer I know, the prayer you taught me when I was 5 years old. And as I said the words, I felt the room change. The heaviness that had pressed down on me for 4 weeks lifted, not gradually, all at once, like a stone being rolled away from a tomb, and in the space where the heaviness had been, something else moved in. Light. Not the light from the window, a different light, a light I could feel rather than see. And in that light, the doubt dissolved, not because I found answers to my theological questions, but because the questions themselves stopped mattering. The certainty that came was not intellectual. It was deeper than that. It was the certainty of a child who knows his mother is in the room, even with his eyes closed. And from that morning on, the scratching never returned. Not once, not in all the years that followed. Brother Giacomo stayed in San Giovanni Rotondo. He was ordained a priest. He served in the monastery for 41 years. He never transferred. He never requested a different assignment. When his superiors offered him a prestigious teaching position at a seminary in Rome, he declined. When they offered him a parish of his own in Campania, he declined again. He wanted to stay in the place where he had learned the most important lesson of his life. And every single morning, at 4:15, without exception, in sickness and in health, in joy and in grief, in winter cold and in summer heat, he whispered the same 5 words that Padre Pio whispered: "Jesus, Mary, Joseph, help me." He became known among the younger friars as the one whose cell was always peaceful. Other friars reported disturbances, sounds, presences, the usual spiritual warfare that the monastery experienced, especially at night. But Brother Giacomo's cell was always quiet, always calm, as if the 5 words he whispered every morning had drawn a circle of protection around his room that the darkness could not penetrate. If this testimony from the life of Padre Pio is touching your heart tonight, and you would like to support the sharing of these hidden teachings, you can use the Super Thanks button just below this video. Your support allows us to continue bringing these spiritual revelations to English-speaking Catholics around the world. Every contribution, no matter how small, is an act of love. And as we have learned tonight, it is not the size of the prayer or the gift that matters. It is the humility behind it. God bless your generosity. Now here is the part that I want you to carry with you when you leave this video tonight. Padre Pio did not just whisper those 5 words once. He whispered them every morning, without exception, for decades, rain or shine, sick or healthy, in agony from his stigmata or in the rare moments of relief, every single morning. And there is a reason for that. The reason is that spiritual protection is not a one-time event. It is a daily practice. Think of it this way. You lock your front door every night before you go to bed. You do not lock it once and then leave it unlocked for the rest of your life, trusting that the single act of locking it years ago will keep you safe forever. No, you lock it every night, because every night is a new opportunity for an intruder to try the door. The spiritual life works the same way. Every morning is a new day. Every morning the enemy tests the perimeter. Every morning he tries the door, and the 5 words, "Jesus, Mary, Joseph, help me," are the lock, but only if you turn the key every day. Padre Pio understood this with a clarity that most people never achieve. He understood that the spiritual battle is not won with a single dramatic victory. It is won with 1,000 quiet mornings, 1,000 whispered prayers, 1,000 small acts of humility repeated so often that they become as natural as breathing. He once told Brother Modestino, "The devil is not afraid of grand gestures. He is afraid of persistence. He can withstand a single prayer. He cannot withstand a soul that prays the same prayer every day for 50 years. That is the power of the 5 words. Not their complexity, not their theological depth, their persistence, their daily repetition, their stubborn, humble, childlike insistence on asking for help from the Holy Family every single morning, no matter what. There is something else I want you to know, something that the church historian who published Brother Giacomo's letter discovered when he researched the testimony further. He found that Padre Pio did not just say the 5 words once each morning. He said them 3 times, 3 repetitions, once for Jesus, once for Mary, once for Joseph. Each repetition addressed to a different member of the Holy Family, and with each repetition his voice grew softer, not louder, softer, until the 3rd repetition was barely audible, even to someone pressing their ear against the door. The historian asked an elderly friar why Padre Pio grew quieter with each repetition instead of louder. The friar said something remarkable. He said, "Because with each repetition, the Holy Family drew closer. And you do not need to shout at someone who is standing right beside you. The first time, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph hear the call from heaven. The second time, they begin to move toward you. The third time, they are in the room with you. And when the Holy Family is in the room, even a whisper is enough. Even silence is enough, because their presence alone is the protection. The words are just the invitation. Think about that. The words are the invitation, not the protection itself. The protection is the presence of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. The 5 words simply open the door and say, "Come in, I need you, I cannot do this alone," and they come. Every time, without exception, without condition, without judgment. They come because they were asked, and they stay because they were wanted. What the church historian also discovered was that the 5 words did not stay within the walls of San Giovanni Rotondo. They spread quietly, the way all truly powerful things spread, not through books or sermons or official church pronouncements, through whispers, through one person telling another. Brother Giacomo himself taught the practice to at least 40 young friars who came to the monastery over the decades. And those friars, when they were transferred to other monasteries across Italy and beyond, carried the 5 words with them. Father Pellegrino, who served at a parish in Foggia, began saying the 5 words every morning and reported that the disturbances in the rectory, which had plagued 3 previous pastors, ceased completely within a week. A Capuchin sister in Pietrelcina, Padre Pio's hometown, learned the practice from a visiting friar and introduced it to her entire community. She wrote in her journal, "We had been praying elaborate novenas and litanies for protection against the spiritual oppression that seemed to hang over our convent like a fog. Nothing worked. Then Sister Margarita taught us the 5 words. We say them together at 4:15 every morning in memory of Padre Pio, and the fog lifted. Not because our novenas were wrong, but because we had forgotten that the most powerful prayer is the simplest one, the one that does not try to impress God, but simply asks for help, like a child pulling on its mother's sleeve. That is what these 5 words are. A child pulling on the sleeve of the Holy Family. And the Holy Family always looks down, they always bend close, they always answer, because that is what families do. Brother Giacomo died in 1998 at the age of 65. He had spent 41 years in San Giovanni Rotondo. In his final days, he was lucid and calm. The younger friars gathered around his bed. One of them, a novice who had been in the monastery for less than a year and who was already struggling with the same doubts and disturbances that had plagued Giacomo decades earlier, leaned close and asked, "Brother, what is the most important thing you have learned in 41 years? Brother Giacomo smiled, the same knowing smile that Brother Leone had given him all those years ago, and he whispered, barely audible, with his last breath, 5 words, every morning, never stop. Let me tell you what this means for you tonight. You do not need to be a mystic. You do not need to have the stigmata. You do not need to see demons or smell roses or experience visions. You do not need a single supernatural gift. All you need is 5 words and the humility to say them every morning. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, before you check your phone, before you make your tea, before you open your eyes fully, whisper these words, Jesus, Mary, Joseph, help me. Say them 3 times. Once for each member of the Holy Family. Say them softly, not because softness has magical power, but because softness is the sound of humility, and humility is the key that opens every door in heaven. Commit to this tonight, not as a one-time experiment, as a daily practice for the rest of your life, every morning, without exception, without analysis, without theological debate, just 5 words, spoken by a humble heart, into the silence of the dawn. Padre Pio did it for 50 years. Brother Giacomo did it for 41, and the demons could not stay. not because the words were powerful, but because the presence they invoked was infinitely more powerful than any darkness that has ever existed or will ever exist in this world or any other. Now I want to hear from you. Write in the comments, "I commit to 5 words." And if you are already saying a morning prayer, share it. Let this comment section become a wall of prayer that the enemy cannot breach. And know that Padre Pio, who said he would stand at the gates of heaven and refuse to enter until all his spiritual children had entered before him, is watching over you tonight, with his wounded hands, with his bleeding heart, with his whispered words still echoing through the corridors of that monastery on the mountain. "Jesus, Mary, Joseph, help me." Say it tonight, say it tomorrow, say it every morning for the rest of your life, and the demons will not stay. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a message from Padre Pio. God bless you and your family. Until next time.